Hello, Cubs fans, and welcome to a brand new edition of Cubs on Tap. I am Ron Luce. As you can hear, I don't have a full voice tonight, so pardon me. Dealing with a little bit of, congestion and all the fun stuff with the summer bridge into fall. Unfortunately, that is where we're at. But as noted, before we get into Cubs baseball, Cubs lose tonight, which sucks. Cubs lost yesterday, which sucks, and Cubs lost on Saturday, which sucks. But nonetheless, we're going to find good things to talk about. I'm Ron Luce. I'm joined tonight by Joakim, Stu, and the Juice Man himself, Mr. Juice on Tap, my friend. How are you doing tonight?
It's Juice and Friends today.
Juice and Friends.
No, man, went to the South Bend Cubs game yesterday. Unfortunately, they couldn't hold that lead and lost. Got this bobblehead for free with some purchases, some things. From the Cubs Den store, their version over there. The Joakim Noah bobblehead was free from the season. Saw it here sitting on my work desk because my work desk is also my podcast desk, and said it's Juice and Friends tonight.
It is Juice and Friends indeed. I'm really, really intrigued to hear what Stu has to say about Cubs baseball over the last couple of days. But Juice, let's dive into some stuff. So obviously, tonight's game just kind of sucked. McKinstry continues to hit, certainly has proven to become a bright spot of this team. Sunday's game, fairly underwhelming, I think, overall for most fans. Really, I think the highlight of the weekend, because obviously Joey and I got a treat on Friday. We got to talk about a winner over the Rockies on Friday afternoon. Was kind of the McKinstry game. Strode put on an absolute show. Everything we wanted to see, right, in terms of Cubs baseball. And then there was a lot lacking over the weekend. But we will grasp to one thing that we've talked about at Cubs on Tap. We've had fun talking about at Cubs on Tap. And that is one Hayden Wesneski, because he got his first start on Saturday. It was big news. Everybody's like, oh, it's about time. They're going to let this kid start. And I think a lot of people, Juice, and I don't know about you, but at least this was my thought going into his start was, okay, they're going to let him go 5, maybe 4, then they'll piggyback him with somebody. Oh, no. That was not the case at all. He was so efficient. They left him in for 7 innings. He didn't walk a single soul. He only gave up 3 hits and 1 earned run, and he struck out 7. I don't know about you, Juice, but last time I checked, I'm pretty sure that's pretty fucking good for your first start in the major leagues. Dude, this guy is just continuing to impress every single time he pitches for the Chicago Cubs.
Yeah, I think if you're going to round out what each loss in the last 3 games has been, it's been losses, but it's been encouraging losses. They've been a lot of things to take from each loss. Tonight it's a beating, but morale goes yard. And hopefully that is one of those season cappers where you can carry some momentum into the year. I'd like to see him, end this back half of the month going in with a strong finish to, this season, just to kind of cap some of the things that he's done while he's here. Yan Gomes had a great game over the weekend that I think is a lot more telling than people are kind of talking about, considering that I'm seriously doubting how committed they are to Wilson Contreras at this point. With the injury, with a lot of the stuff, behind the scenes, I've heard nothing but the fact that the Cubs and a lot of the MLB are not interested in him going into next year. It's going to be interesting to see if the Cubs do offer the qualifying offer, if he just takes it, because at this point that may be the best offer he's going to get out there for the most, annual money that he could get per year. The worst scenario was him getting hurt at the end of this year. He needed to hit going into the offseason to kind of establish a market, and he hasn't done that, which it sucks for the Cubs, sucks for him. All parties lose in this situation, because the Cubs absolutely wanted him to hit, and then have the option of, hey, if he wants to take the qualifying offer, he could have totally did it, and the Cubs would have been okay with it. But there's questions behind him accepting that now. And if he hit, he probably would have required a better deal for a DH spot or maybe a fourth outfielder, because we've seen him do that from time to time, or a catcher who DHs most of the time but gets to catch every other day or whatever. But he hasn't done that, and now it's a question of what his market's going to be. And the Cubs don't want to let him walk for nothing, so they're probably going to offer him that qualifying offer. So that may be the best, but here nor there. That's something we'll talk about over the offseason. But you nailed it. Yan Gomes having a nice day almost makes it feel like they're going to be okay at that position if he's able to continue that and have the end of the season that he's kind of having right now. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. The top story of the weekend was Hayden Wesneski. And I have so many thoughts on him because there's obviously the slider and the running fastball is elite. And he's working that changeup into lefties. Am I wrong? And I got this question for you, and this is a good topic for us to just kind of start on him. I kind of want to see what his outings are like when he doesn't have the slider, because I think that's almost what dictates how good he can really be. Can he fight through not having the command? Because each time he stepped out there, he's had that pitch. Right. And when he has that pitch, he's unhittable. That's exactly what it is. But there's going to be days where you don't have the feel for that slider. And I want to see what he can do when he doesn't have that. And it's not a negative thing. Maybe it's just his pitch that he feels like he can always control or have somewhat of a decent outing with, because he is just that confident in it that when he misses his spot, it's that dirty. And that's okay. But I want to see the growth I want to see each and every one of these guys meet adversity. And I think we've seen Morel have that. We saw Justin Steele have that and bounce back from it. Keegan Thompson with the injury is going through it right now. I want him to end fast. Don't get me wrong. I want him to throw again, maybe have a couple more starts before the end of the season or get into a ball game. But there's a little part of me too that wants him to have one of those starts where he has to fight through it. And I think we'll learn more about who he is if we can get one start where he doesn't have that pitch. I'm always rooting for him to have it. Don't get me wrong, but I want to learn more about him. And I think that in the short sample size we've had, it's clear he's got stuff. But does he have the makeup to, when he isn't his best self, to fight through it? And that's something I'm really looking forward to, for his next couple starts and going into the offseason, just to see, how he battles, what his adjustments are, and what he does to just get through 5-6 innings. Talk about it all the time. Good pitchers fight through 5 and 6 when they don't have their best stuff. John Lester was that guy. How many times did John Lester take the ball and you're like, man, he doesn't have it. But then you looked up at the end of the game and he went 7 and he only gave up 2, and the Cubs won a 5-2 ball game. And you were like, man, like John Lester had his C stuff and the Cubs still won a ball game against a really good team. Those are the starts, and those are the things I kind of want to see going into the offseason.
Yeah, and I think Juicy brought up a great point on that too, right? Because with position players, it's a little different, right? Like you go through a slump and you got to battle out of that slump, and it's still a battling process, right? It's still adversity that these guys are enduring. But I think, like you said, right, with pitchers, it's a little different because chances are, more often than not, you're not going to have every single pitch under perfect control. That's just not realistic. And it's the great ones that, like you said, can fight through it, still give you effective pitching, and be a, top of the line starter. And I think we're starting to see a lot of that with Justin Steele. I think especially late in the season, right? Like early in the season when he didn't have the stuff, he got beat up, right? And that's just kind of how it went. And when he did have the stuff, he looked great. But then by that later part of the season, I mean, shit, I can tell you right now from his second to last start, I think it was before the injury, when he pitched at Wrigley on that Sunday game against the Brewers and got to sit close enough, probably the best vantage point in the ballpark to truly enjoy and appreciate the pitching process that, Steele went through that day. And like for the first inning, he fought himself. Like it took him 6 pitches to get through the first guy. Granted, he struck him out, but it took him 6 pitches. You could see he was fighting himself a little bit early. And then all of a sudden he settled down and just cruised, right? And even on the pitches he did miss and wasn't feeling it, he would come back and he'd get it done. And you saw a couple of starts just in general later down the stretch there for Steele, where you could tell there was days he did not have it. He was fighting himself all day long, but was so nasty that he was still effective. And I agree. I think that's something we're going to still see with Wesneski, right? Because he's only pitched 3 times for the Cubs, right? Yeah. It's just every time he's pitched, he's gone multiple innings. So it's like, you see a lot of them, but it's at, very variable times. I agree. I hope we do get a chance to see that. And it may not happen this season, right? He might just continue to roll this season and into next year. But it's a crazy thing to think, but like he could win a rotation spot coming out of camp next year. I don't see how he can't. I think it's possible. Do I think it's likely? Maybe not. But if he comes out in spring training and keeps looking like this, then all of a sudden it becomes kind of probably looking at each other being like, yeah, we kind of have to put him in the rotation. Like, where the fuck else are we going to put him? You know what I mean? Right. But I agree with you, right? It might be until next season that we see that struggle process, but it will be interesting to see because, like you said, right, his slider is his wipeout pitch, and it is just so filthy. It's so gross. But if he can hone that change up that he's working on, especially in on lefties or away from lefties, and he's able to, because he does have that running fastball. He's got the cutter, and then he's just got your traditional 4-seamer, but if he can be, that guy where it's like, hey, shit, my slider's good today, but it's not great. I got to really hit my spots with these, because essentially, right, they're all variations of a fastball when you look at it, cutter,
right.
Change, run fastball. He's like, I can at least get all my fastballs down. If that's what he becomes, like you said, Juice, where it's a C-level out effort in terms of stuff and he's getting it done in 7 innings of work, like that projects incredibly well then for the future and for his future, not just for the Cubs.
Yeah, I think too, like Ron, you brought up a good point because he needs to develop more pitches than just those 2. I think that's the next. Good starters have 2+ pitches. We talk about it all the time. Max Scherzer's and Jacob deGrom's and Walker Buehler's, they have 5. Those are the guys that you put at the top of that. And I want to touch on what you talked about him going out and maybe getting a rotation spot. I think that going into camp, it should be a full-on competition. And I absolutely believe that the Cubs are going to spend some money on the rotation as well. I don't think that we're going to go into this next year and see the same names that are fighting for this. I think a lot of these guys will move on or they'll be demoted into bullpen roles because I know that they're going to have to find a way to fill a lot of that as well because some of the prospects that are maybe plus out of the bullpen are at lower levels in the minor leagues. So they're not going to be ready going into next year. It's going to be interesting to see. And that's guys like I think it was Joey who wrote an article about Keegan Thompson, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe he put up a tweet or something around the lines of, maybe he's a 3+ inning guy, at the end of this, and that's what he goes back to doing. Or maybe there's another guy that we're talking about that it ends up being that. But here nor there, I think that they're going to go out and spend. And I don't see why a guy like that who maybe takes the next step next season isn't the 5. Like they gave Kyle Hendricks that role in 2015 and look how that paid dividends. I think that there's going to be a guy like that who's out there that ends up being that stopgap. Maybe it's Hayden Wesneski. So with that said, I look a lot into, the team and what roles are going to be defined. And I think that it'd be a disservice if he's not given that huge chance. He should absolutely, because it's cheap, controllable pitching that he's only going to get better with reps. And that's why, I want him to meet that roadblock so badly, because I think that, like much you said about Steele, it'll make him better. It'll make him understand the moment. I think a lot of the reasons why Justin Steele suffered from that early on when he came up in his Cubs tenure was because he wasn't used to not having his stuff and having to battle so hard. Let's face it, like there's no league that can simulate what MLB hitting is like. Like you see it in AAA, you see some guys in AA and single A that are making their ways up. And I'm going to tell you right now, I've watched a lot of high A baseball this year, as you know. There are certain guys who walk up there who they move differently opposed to your normal guy who's going to be an everyday minor leaguer. Like Pete Crow Armstrong is like the exception to all of this. Like you watch Pete Crow Armstrong out there in center field, and that guy moves different. That guy walks different. He swings different. The ball sounds different off his bat. He runs the bases different. To kind of loop it all together into like this conversation that we're having, I think that when they get to the MLB, the competition is so difficult that when you see Justin Steele kind of struggling, and like he did, I think it's more of adjustment for them because they're not used to getting in a spot where they have to use all 5 pitches to get out of an inning. So that's why, like, when I look at Hayden, I'm like, man, like down in the minor leagues, you can lean on that slider, right? You could just throw it, and you get into trouble and you can get out. That's not going to happen in the majors. So, like, I want him so badly to get in that situation where he has to pitch out of something, or he has a bad start and he doesn't have it, just for the growth that I think that it'll open his eyes to, all right, I got a great slider. I got a good fastball. I need 2 more pitches. Otherwise, I've capped myself at a 4th or 5th starter. And that's exactly what this is, because there are just not that many 2-pitch starters out there that throw 2 pitches and end up being Cy Young candidates. That's just not how this works. So that's why, like, going in the offseason, I want him to have great starts. Don't get me wrong. But I want him to meet some adversity because I think it'll open his eyes on what he really needs to work on going into the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the offseason, Juice, and the competition right next year for the rotation. And I think, even just for the pitching in general, and this is kind of a way where we can tie this into tonight's game, because as Jeremiah beautifully points out for us here in the comments, tonight's game was meh. Like, meh is a good way of putting it.
So much.
And it's just the nature of the beast, right? It's September baseball. The Cubs aren't in contention. You're going to get a lot of meh games. It's just natural. But you look at tonight's game, right? And Wade Miley got beat up a little bit, and Rowan Wick got beat up a little bit. And, some of these guys are starting to, I don't want to say, play their way out of things, but are at least you're starting to see what you truly have here, right? And next year, again, if they are spending money in the offseason, and I think that's more in the rotation and less in the bullpen, but you've so many bullpen pieces, Juice, that are getting close to ready for the majors. And you could argue some of these guys that have made starts this year. You brought up Keegan as a great point. Keegan, they announced today, is going to come back in the next few days. He's coming out of the bullpen. He's not going to start the rest of the season. He's going to be a bullpen guy, because I truly do believe that he is that 3-inning guy. Like, I think that's good, but he's going to be an elite 3-inning guy. And, and you know what? That's okay. Because if you have that on a competitive Cubs team and you're in the playoffs and your starter only goes 5 and you're in it because the offense is going, but like it's a tight ball game, that's where a 3-inning Keegan Thompson plays immediate dividends in that kind of situation. Next season, you're going to have a lot of guys competing to kick guys like Rowan Wick and Michael Rucker out of this bullpen. Like Ben Leeper, we've heard his name. Ethan Roberts, who we barely saw this year because of the injury. Estrada, who looked good in 2 innings of work tonight. Like, there are a ton of guys. Javier Assad might be a bullpen guy. Adbert Alzolay might be a bullpen guy.
Yeah, and I want to touch real quick. It was Joey was talking about Adbert Alzolay, him coming out it was not Keegan Thompson. I looked back at the tweet, and that was Joey was talking about Adbert Alzolay.
But maybe that's what it is. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine the Cubs bullpen sitting here and telling people, yeah, we got a kid, Ethan Roberts, who throws the 6 slider. We've got, Javier Assad, who just, paints the corners and just knows how to pitch. Oh, we got this guy too that can come out for an inning like Alzolay and just shove. Like, Could you imagine if they have an elite bullpen just built of high-end arms? It's deadly. It's lethal. And then that's where you do find, right, your Steels and your Wesneskis, and then you do go pay for your Stromans and maybe your Carlos Rodons or whatever the hell it is that they decide to spend money on. Like, that's where that makes sense. But holy shit, like, that's not a bad problem to have. Like, I'm truthfully not mad if both Keegan Thompson and, you know, and Adbert Alzolay and Caleb Killian just become elite bullpen guys. Okay. Arms are arms, baby. If it's an arms race in the MLB, if you've got good arms in every position in your rotation and in your bullpen, you're golden, pony boy. That's how you win ball games in the MLB. Like, everybody wants to say, oh yeah, the long ball's sexy. Girls dig the long ball. Yeah, but guess what wins you titles? Defense and fucking pitching. Like, that's just the nature of the beast.
And Ron, we talk so much about the fact that having relievers who can go 2, 3, 4 innings are so valuable. Each of those guys you named, if they're cruising, why are you taking them out? They can definitely throw 40, 50 pitches. That's, I want to allude back to like an April conversation Joey and I had at the end of it when we were going back and forth on Steele. And if Steele was going to be a starting rotation arm, obviously he's pitched his way into it. We were talking a lot about Keegan Thompson, how he was so great early on in the year. And we talked about having a lefty and a righty who could go 3+ innings. Now, at the end of the season, we look up and you may have 3 or 4 guys who could do that from the right-hand side, which I think bodes great for flexibility for David Ross. Let's say that you have an injury in your rotation and you have these guys. You could stretch one of them out and get 4 or 5 innings out of them. And then you bring in another reliever that can go 4 innings to get you to the end of the ball game. And you don't kill your bullpen. These are the things we're talking about that I think Cleveland does pretty well over the course of the last couple of years, and I think we know why. It's because they had Carter Hawkins, and they absolutely run this type of strategy when it comes to pitching. It's throw all of them at the dartboard and then find which ones hit the bullseyes, and then you kind of move them around. Say, this is who I need to use here. This is who I need to use there. You're so right. And I think that it's absolutely a great problem to have. And it also feeds into the fact that, like, the Cubs have so much financial flexibility that, I mean, the possibilities are endless for what they could do with these arms. There's literally nothing that's off the table, I think, in terms of guy pitching in this role or that role or this. And we forget, eventually we're going to get Cody Hoyer back too, who's got deadly stuff at the back end of the bullpen. So there's a lot of names who did not have seasons because of arm injuries or because they were plagued by injuries all year, like Adbert Alzolay, who, they didn't have the reps but they should be mentioned in our minds as very legitimate options. Adbert Alzolay, I don't think is going to factor in as a starter anymore. I really don't. I think that ship's kind of sailed, but there's nothing wrong with him being a 3-inning guy. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And like you said, there's nothing wrong with Caleb Killian being that either. If that's what you got back, if you got back a right-handing throwing, almost guy in the Brewers, they traded him, Hader. If you got a right-handed Hader out of this whole thing, I'd take that for that trade. Absolutely.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely. So, I think that while, like, just to round out, the weekend sucked. The Cubs obviously didn't play great baseball, but there were moments. If you were watching with a different color glass on, you absolutely saw good things this weekend. And you saw good things tonight too, all things considered. But I agree with you, Ron. I think you brought up a great point, considering all the fact that there are so many pitchers on this roster that could fill in at different roles.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Juice, you mentioned some of the names that, like, people didn't talk about a lot this season because Adbert was one of them, right? I think Adbert kind of went forgotten for a while. Not totally forgotten, obviously, but he wasn't at the forefront of conversations for people to add to their bullpen or whatever. But here's the list of guys right now, Juice, on just the 40-man that are on the IL in terms of pitchers. And obviously some of these guys we've seen a lot of this year, but You'll understand from my point here in a second. Steven Brault, Kyle Hendricks, Cody Hoyer, Alec Mills, Ethan Roberts, Justin Steele, Keegan Thompson, Brad Wick, who we have not even spoken about most of the season.
And he's got great stuff too. I root for that guy.
Brad Wick's sick. Like Cody Hoyer's sick. Even Steven Brault looked really good. We just haven't seen a lot of him because he's been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But it just goes to your point, Juice, of there's talent here right now that we've seen. Jeremiah Estrada, like Jeremiah says here, how about Estrada just pumping fastballs right down the middle and getting whiffs? Yeah. But guess what? Like, there's so much more talent that can do that we just haven't seen this year because guys are hurt. Mm-hmm. Just imagine when these guys are healthy. Like, realistically, if they were healthy this year, most of those guys we mentioned, like, Ullman probably isn't up this year. Rucker's probably not up this year, right? We don't see a lot of these guys probably this year coming out of the bullpen at all because they have the bullpen depth. It's just everybody's been fucking hurt. Like, that's been the name of the game.
I mean, how long does Rowan Wick go? If they actually have bodies to fill in for that.
Absolutely. If you would have told me that by halfway through the season or like early August that Brad Wick, Cody Hoyer, Adbert Alzolay and Steven Brault were all going to be back. Rowan Wick's the odd man out in his DFA.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Like, that's just the name of the game. But that's, like you said, Juice, that's a great problem to have. When you have to make tough decisions because you have that much talent, that's a epic problem to have. And who knows? Who knows what's going to happen in the offseason? And this is an interesting question here, Jeremiah, bringing up DeGrom. A 4-year, $215 million contract. Would he accept that? I don't do quick math very well, but I believe that's $54.5 million roughly a year, if I did my math correctly. I'm not really good at math here, Juice.
Yeah, you're about right.
Maybe 53.5.
The accountant
sounds
over
a little
here.
Better. Yeah. Hey, man. Everybody's like, you're an accountant.
I know.
You're good at math. No.
Everybody got a calculator.
Excel and calculators, baby. Excel and I double and triple check myself on simple math sometimes. Let me tell you.
I'm with you, brother.
But like, I mean, yeah, I think in theory a guy like that would accept that kind of money, and I think you're going to see a lot more of those contracts. Like, I think baseball is going to go that way, where it's going to be a lot more higher AAV but lower term. Like we saw it with Stroh, right?
Yeah.
I think if Stroh was going for a long-term deal, probably would have signed for like 21 million per season if he was going like 5 or 6 years. But because he went 3 years, he was able to front load the AAV a little more, make it 25 for the first 2. I mean, a lot of people forget his third-year options for quote unquote only 21 million.
Yeah, I have a question for you though on that. Do you think that only rings true for aging pitchers though? Like, do you think that those are the contracts that you'll see from high-end aces that are looking for a new team? Or do you think that there's a universe where guys like Mike Trout are taking 50 million, 60 million per year? See, I think the long-term deals are for the position players. And that's
but Carlos Correa took a 3-year contract to go to Minnesota with opt-outs after 1 year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what Stroh's contract is too, if you really think about it. It's a 2-year deal with an opt-out at year 3 if he wants it.
I guess, yeah, but I also, you got to factor in the lockout and how much did that attribute to finding him a deal and things like that as well. I see that, and I think that him too, maybe the market for him wasn't as deep, considering that there were only 5 teams who were really buying last year. Right. So I think we're probably both right. We're probably both on a sense of like, if the market is going to present itself for long-term deals, players are absolutely going to take 10 for, $700 million, whatever it ends up being eventually. But I think that based on the level of contenders and true contenders, let's face it, like if you're a team that's hoping to win the second wildcard slot, you're probably not going out and signing somebody for $700 million. But maybe you're going out there and saying, yeah, high, $50 million a year for 3 years. Maybe you're doing it that way. I'm not an agent and I'm not a GM, so I hate getting into these conversations. But I was just like, I'm trying to pick like the only deals I've seen like that are aging aces. Like those are the only ones that we've really seen a level other than Correa. It was a great callback to him. I'm just curious, like I'm a baseball. I love seeing things change because I like adjusting with the game because as we talk about on the show, we don't know everything. We've never seen it all. And you're going to watch a baseball game, tomorrow that you're going to see something you've never seen before.
Right.
So I'm interested in that aspect, and I know we're going to go deep into that. That was my question for you. Like, do you think that's just based for position players, or you think that or pitchers or that position players could absolutely get in that running?
I think they absolutely can, and I think it's going to come down, like you said, to the market, Juice, because I think you're starting to see it more and more in baseball where guys want these lucrative long-term deals and the ownership isn't willing to pay what they're asking because in baseball contracts are guaranteed. So
Right.
I think that might change the game in itself from a contract perspective of where more guys, if the long-term dollars aren't what they want them to be, they'll say, hey, look, I'll give you your financial flexibility 4 years out from now, but I'm going to make your wallet hurt like hell for the next 4 years. And I think we could see a lot of that. I also think to a fault, I don't know if we'll see it as much as like we do in the NBA, but I think maybe you will start to see some guys do like the Carlos Correa deal, right? Where like, I'll take my 3-year contract, but I want opt-outs built into every single year. That way, hey, if I have a really good year, I can opt out and go get more money.
Or if I'm Trout and I hate it here.
Yeah. Or just if you want to change the scenery, or B, at least if you maybe have a down year or you get injured or whatever, then you could just take the option and rebound and you have another year to go at it again and try for it. Like, I think there's going to be a place for both, to your point. I don't ever think one's going to totally go away from the other. But I do think we'll start to see more of these short-term deals become a thing in the future. And it might just be, like you said, completely indicative on the market each year. There might be years, like you said, where only 4 teams are willing to go out and really spend money. So maybe that is the year that a guy says, hey, I'll go take essentially what's a 2-year guaranteed contract with 4 years potentially with opt-outs. Maybe that's what happens. And then after the 2 seasons, if the market really starts to uptick and you got teams ready to spend some money, I'm going to opt out. I'm going to go get my payday. Bada bing, bada boom, 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 boom. Let's go, team, and keep it moving, right? I think you're really going to see both. I'm telling you.
I got one more follow-up when you're done with that thought, though. Just go ahead. Keep going.
Okay, I was just saying, just this wraps the bow up on it. I just think in general in sports, you're going to start seeing more contracts with player control built in some way, shape, or
kind of like the NBA.
Think we are kind of, and I don't, like I said, I don't know if it'll ever truly get to the point of the NBA because truly the NBA, there are so few players just in the sport as a whole. I mean, like the actual statistics on population of like how much of the human population in the history of the NBA's existence that have actually played in the NBA is like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. Like it's so small when you really consider it. Like they really are the product, right? Like at the end of the day, like it's there. Yeah, there's a team, but at the same time, I can have 3 dominant players on the floor and we could probably go win a title. You know what I mean? Where in baseball, in football, even in hockey, you need more. And that's just the nature of the game. And it's not a shot at the NBA at all. I just think that's the nature of basketball as a sport. The nature of all these other sports is not like that. But I do think you are going to start to see more of that athlete having control for themselves than we ever have before. I really do think you're going to, and like I said, I don't think it's going to overwhelm the market. Like I'm not saying you're never not going to see an 8-year deal where the guy's just like, yeah, thanks for the 8 years of guaranteed money. I'll see you later. But I think you will. I think the Correa, Stroman, Scherzer type deals will become more common, and not just for aging players. Like maybe even for guys that are, almost like bridge contracts. You know what I mean? Like we talked about,
fair.
Like bridge contracts in hockey are a big deal, right? Like Alex DeBrinket's on a bridge contract right now, and he got shipped off by the Hawks, and he's making $6 million. He's a 40 goal scorer. He's going to make a lot more than $6 million on his next contract. I think maybe you'll see guys that, rather than having to deal with arbitration, just say, look, give me a 3-year deal for $17 million a year, like a Seau contract minus a couple years. And then there's still 26 when they hit the free agent market because you buy out some of those arbitration years. And then they hit the market at 26 and you can hit big then. Or you can do it again. Or you can be like, I think this is the breakout year. Maybe you do one more year and all of a sudden you just go ape shit and you're the best player in the sport. Then you really cash in on your payday and then you're good to go. I think it really depends because there's a lot of risk in it too, right? And I mean, we could sit here all night and debate this, but sure. You get where I'm going with that.
So if that's the case, that we're going to see more of these, and this is just a hypothetical, do you think that puts lower market or middle market teams back in it more or less because the AVV on a contract is so high per year that can you really dedicate $50 million of your own payroll on a team that maybe only spends $80 million a year? You know, depends. Like that's my thing is like I want what's best for baseball. And if more of these small short-term deals happen, it almost like I'm happy being a Cub fan because the Cubs are always going to have money to spend and be one of the top payrolls. But in terms of like being top loaded, there's only maybe 8 teams who would be able to do that. You know, so do you end up just negotiating against the 8 every time for top end players that, like you said, with bridge contracts and things like that? And that's why, like, to build even further into this conversation, do you ever think it gets to that NBA kind of style where there's a cap on what they can, what a free agent team that wasn't the drafted team has for a player? Like a max deal for. So do you think that like maybe baseball moves that way to kind of play back the idea of having talent widely spread along, you know, all 30 teams within? Because I think that's the problem if you see more of these. I truly think that it almost X's out the small term deal. Because let's face it, like what's the payroll for the Marlins like this year? 50 million. It's got to be like close to that. Or Oakland's probably even better. Like 50 million is probably almost double of what the Oakland payroll was this year. I thought it was in like the 40s or 45. So that's why like, or maybe like 5 million more, whatever, or less, whatever. But I'm just saying, like, I'm just curious if that is good for the game or if it's bad for obviously it's good for us. We'll sit here and all these low 3-4 year deals on high, you know, per year values. I'll take all day being a Cub fan. But if you're a fan of Oakland, you're like, no shot I have any chance of. And that's the thing too. Players are going to go, well, like you talked about earlier, I'm 24. I can take this 3-year deal and then double cash in, you know, in 3 more years when I'm 27 and still in my prime. And maybe then I take that 7-year long deal. Or maybe I'm 24, I title chase with these, you know, short 3-year deals with high, you know, yearly value. And then when I'm 27, I sign a 10-year deal with, you know, the Angels for, you know, like 500 million, you know, and that's like my question, like, is that good for the game or what do you think? Like, what are your thoughts on any of that?
I think it really depends. I truthfully, I think what would be most beneficial for the game is instituting a floor that you have to spend every year. Sure. Because right, like here you were talking payrolls, right? And I pulled them up while you were sharing your latest point. There are 1, 2, 3, 4. Shit, I lost count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 teams that have less than $100 million payroll. Yeah. Kansas City's at 92.5. Tampa Bay is at just shy of 91. Arizona is at about 84.5. Marlins are actually about 83.5. Okay. Cleveland's about 66.5. Pittsburgh's right at about 66. Oakland is at 48.2. Yeah. Really interesting, though. With a .524 win percentage, the lowest payroll in the league this year was the Baltimore Orioles at 43.8.
You want to talk about Moneyball?
Yeah, literally, right? Getting your value out of every
Per
dollar
win?
you spent. Yeah,
Per win, yeah, man.
that's easily in baseball. And like even the Rays, I mean, the Rays and Guardians are
Sure.
both in that conversation too, and they're all above 500.
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
Guardians were the most shocking to me, and that I thought they would have been much higher than that. But then you start to
yeah,
think about their roster, and their
yeah.
roster isn't filled with anybody other than
Jose
cheap
Ramirez
1-year deals and
and
Jose Ramirez.
well, and that's kind of right. What you see with a lot of these smaller clubs is they have that like one token guy that they pay a lot of money to, right? Like right now in
Right.
Tampa, that's Wander Franco.
Mhm.
For years, it was Kevin Kiermaier. They kind of did it though. But see, here's the thing now too, right? Look at Tampa. Tampa just gave Tyler Glass now a 2-year extension at $25 million a year. And he has next year already under contract. So it effectively works as a 3-year deal.
Right.
And he's only 30, Juice.
Mhm.
So now all of a sudden, like maybe that is the method where some of these smaller market teams can contend, because then from I'm running a business going concern standpoint, sorry to throw accounting logic and jargon.
No, I love it. I think
but
we haven't had a nerdy conversation like this on the show in a while.
we need a good nerdy conversation every once in a while. But like you throw in the going concern aspect of being a business, like when you have costs projected out over long term, there's more uncertainty with that, right?
Sure.
There's more risk involved. There's the risk that the player drops off and becomes useless. I almost think that teams would want to sign guys to shorter contracts because in theory, you know what you're getting probably over that length of that contract with that player, right? You're not having I hate to use this because this is going to break my own heart to use it, but like you're not getting an 8-year deal for an aging Brent Seabrook who plays a physical game and you know his body's eventually going to give out on him. And that's exactly what happened for the Chicago Blackhawks. Like if you're giving these guys like really lucrative 3 and 4 year deals, at least you're kind of getting your money's worth, especially in that time period, right? Like realistically, the Mets are going to get $40 million a year worth of Max Scherzer. Let's just call it how it is. I mean, the guy's also a fucking robot, but like, but at least they didn't give him a 7-year deal where 4 of those years he might be at best a fifth pitcher, right? They're getting the 3 years of like, we feel pretty certain that these 3 years he's going to be dominant. Stroman's a little bit of a different case, but even Stroman to an extent, right? You sign a 30-year-old pitcher who granted doesn't pitch for velocity, so he's going to age a lot better than most pitchers do. So this isn't the perfect example. But from a, short-sighted perspective, right? You know what you're getting for the 3 years of Marcus Stroman on this contract, right? And actually, you know what? No, I'm glad you brought this up, Scott. And I'm not even here to diss this guy because I respect the fuck out of this guy. But he says, cough, cough, Jason Hayward. To an extent, kind of fair. Look what the Cardinals did. They gave him a 1-year contract. He balled out. And then when they were like, we don't know where you're heading, though, they let him leave. Who's on the hook for $22.5 million to Jason Hayward every year? It's not the St. Louis Cardinals, it's the Chicago Cubs. Like, there's more
in the Cubs' defense, though, the Cardinals offered more to Jason Hayward than the Cubs did. So,
agreed.
I mean, just that for that example, it's hard. There are still players who, are going to take less to go somewhere else. That's just
sure. And I absolutely agree with that. I think the biggest thing, though, with the short-term contract, if I'm an owner, is I can it's like projecting sales, right? I'm not going to project sales on a product 8 years from now because realistically, that product's going to change tenfold. Let's use the iPhone as the example, right? We're getting really nerdy here today, Juice. Let's use the iPhone.
I love it.
They are constantly improving, remodeling, developing that technology to where me forecasting the iPhone 12 for anything greater than probably 3 years would have been stupid. It would have been a waste of time. It's truthfully what it is. That's kind of how I approach this from a business owner's, MLB franchise owner's perspective is I know what I'm getting with this player pretty confidently for a 3 or a 4 year deal, right? Especially if you sign a guy in his prime. Like, I think 2 good examples are the Kyle Schwarber and the Nick Castellanos contracts. Obviously, I know Castellanos had a little bit of a rough year in Philly. He'll be fine. Everybody needs to chill the fuck out. But look at Schwarber. I can confidently sit there if I'm Philly and be like, yeah, I'm probably getting $20 million worth of this player for the next 4 years. After that, not so sure. But then you don't even have to play the what if game, right? Like we talk about it as fans all the time when guys sign contracts that, the team can, they'll sign the deal, right? And we're like, okay, good job, go getting him. The last 4 years of that deal are going to look shit though, right?
Yeah.
How often
9 times out of 10 that happens, right?
Right.
I mean,
sometimes you're almost it's the long-term deal is truthfully better for the player, not for the franchise.
Absolutely.
Because for the player, especially in MLB, right, it depends on the league because every league is different in terms of their contract rules and everything like that, right? Like the NFL is actually, I don't want to say the baseball's the perfect league if you want to be truthful because their contracts are 100% guaranteed. But like the NFL, why do you think guys negotiate so much guaranteed money?
Mm-hmm.
It's so that way, if they contractually can be cut because of the cap, they know what they're guaranteed. They know what they're still getting up front. Baseball, it's incentivized for the player to take a long-term deal because they know that they're guaranteed, X dollars per season, no matter what happens to their performance. Because even if they are cut, they're still owed the money. That's why, but at the same time, the long-term deal can be detrimental to a player if they are hitting. Look at Ronald Acuna Jr. Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to, probably already is quickly outplaying his average annual value on his salary. That is, in theory, as an athlete, dollars you have left on the table. And unfortunately, it's a big risk game, right? It's a big game of risk and a big game of what do I do here? Because you can either, I'm guaranteed this for X years, or I can take a risk, blow out my knee, maybe never be the same player ever again, but I could take a short-term deal for still good money, play my ass off, come back, boom, big payday. But like, especially too, where with the league where it's going, right? Like in theory, these leagues, if they continue to do it right, look at the NBA. I think the NBA is a great example. Look how much money has inflexed into the NBA just over the last 7, 8, 9 years. It's almost doubled, right? Like,
well, that's too. If the MLB actually had a decent PR department,
well, of course,
or had the backing dollar amounts, the MLB contracts would be crazy too for all cities. That's the thing that's kind of in the way. But go ahead.
And I think that's where like it could get really interesting, right? Because that has really changed the dynamic of the NBA and the contracts they take. Because I still remember the years where guys would sign like a 6-year deal. Now those don't even exist in the NBA.
Yeah.
5 years, the max you can get. And that's if you're re-signing with your own team that drafted you.
Yeah.
Even then it's a 4-year cap. But for the league and even for the players to an extent, right? These players are hey, I'm making X dollars for the next 4 years, but I still have expected life on my career where I can go make more money. It's with when you do sign a long-term deal, unless you build those opt-outs in as a player. And that's why I said, I think we start seeing more of these because guys a lot of times will outplay the dollar value they sign for. That's just the nature of the beast. Like if I was Ronald Acuna Jr., obviously I'm not. I'm not an athletic baseball player by any means. If you ever watch me swing a bat, I will whiff at a 16-inch softball, folks. So like, I am not Ronald Acuna Jr. But like, if I was Ronald Acuna Jr. signing that deal with the Braves, because I think it's an 8-year deal, I could be totally wrong. But it's over 6 years. Nonetheless, it's over 6 years.
Right.
If I'm him, I'm saying, hey, I'll take this 8-year deal. But I'm putting in player opt-out starting in after year 4.
Yeah.
Because hey, I've won 2 NL MVPs and I've won a batting title. Now all of a sudden, you aren't a $16 million a year player. You're more like a $35 million a year player.
Mm-hmm.
Now all of a sudden, you just doubled your yearly earnings as a baseball player.
Add to it, he didn't play, but he won a World Series too. So chasing a championship at this point, you want to win more of them. It doesn't matter. You can go wherever you want.
And even those opt-outs could allow a player to do something like that. If you get into a bad situation, you're making good money, but you're like, money's not everything for me, and I want to, I still want to be paid well, but I want to go somewhere better. Player opt-outs. That's why I really do think This is where, maybe this
that's
is the element of the Stroman Correa deals you see more of, is I think you're going to start seeing, hey, this guy signed an 8-year deal, but really what it effectively is on paper is a 3-year deal with player options every single fucking year from year 4 to year 8, where they're opting in or they're opting out and hitting the market again.
and if that's the case, I'm glad I'm a Cub fan.
Yeah.
Because I truly think that pigeonholes a lot of teams that won't be able to step up and take that hit, right? And be like, yeah, 50 million, 6 years, but I may only have you for 3. So I got 3 million, I got 3 years to figure it out. You know,
So
maybe a team
win.
that's it's and then that guy walks out the door, and what are you left with? You're left with nothing. That's if you don't win in those 3 years.
Then you also start to get into a tricky situation if you're some of these teams where, well, you know, we're going to be really bad. Do we know if he's going to opt out? Because if we're trading him, but then you might be able to get more for trading him, because at least then if he goes to a good situation, maybe that team's easily convincing him like, hey, opt in. We're doing this. We're going for a run.
I also think too, like, let's say a small team does the 8-year deal and it gets to the 30 opts out. A large market team could replace it. A small market team could, like, let's say that you get an Acuna type player, but that guy walks out at 3.
Yeah.
I think that a Cub franchise that is a larger market has a better chance of replacing that player with a similar, you know, skill set or contract, opposed to, let's say he walks out of Toronto or, you know, like in Arizona, you know, those teams that, yeah, maybe they're not the floor of the whole like payroll conversation, but they're in the middle, and it's going to be really hard to convince another player to go play there. I think that's the
Texas Rangers.
Yes, that's you know, they're the best. That's the best example
because they're
in it right now.
Well, and they're literally at league average.
Yeah,
according to the payroll thing, like league average is 150. They're at 148. Actually, you know who's on the other side of league average at number 14 at 150, 708? That would be the Chicago Cubs. But yeah, but no, you bring up a great point. And just really quick here from the comments as well, Juice. And we are hitting 52 minutes, but we went on a good rabbit hole here.
Yeah, we had to.
Jeremiah also says, anyone else feel like 30-year-old rookies having to go through arbitration is unfair? Yeah, it's absolute bullshit. I think that's something that needs to be cleaned up in the CBA. I respect the guy having
surprised it wasn't.
Control. I respect having team control on a guy that's like 22, but like a 30-year-old, come on. You're already capped. His age is already capping his earnings. Like, at least let the guy try and go get some money. You know what I mean? Like, give him a fucking chance. But
and let's be honest here. When they go to arbitration and they argue over AVV for the season, none of the players win. Ever. I mean, very rarely. Like like the only guys who really win are like your Chris Bryant's coming off like MVP season. Like those are the guys they look and go, no.
Yeah.
and
even with Chris, they didn't even go to arbitration because the Cubs were just like, hey, look, we know you outplayed the fuck out of this.
Yeah, right.
Here's what we're going to give you. Let's not even go to arbitration. Just like, because I think he was like, after that, that year was only technically like guaranteed like 10. And I think he ended up getting like 17 because they're like,
I think you're right on that.
We know, like, we don't even want to deal with the bullshit and the headache. Just take your 17 for next year. We don't care. Then I think it went up another. Then they were like, yeah, hey, we're not even going to go to arbitration with you. Just here's 22. Like, we know where your trajectory is, you know? So no, I think that's
no, but I love this conversation because this is where the Cubs are going to be stuck this offseason. And if there are great players out there, like we've talked about with this shortstop group that is out there, I wonder which ones are thinking that way. And if the Cubs are smart, those are the ones they try to get in touch with first, because signing a deal like that first, I think, is beneficial because I think a few of them are going to hold out for long-term deals. With that said, maybe I just contradicted myself, and the waiting game is maybe the best part, because if they're not going to sign and no one's going to give them that $8 million, maybe they just fall in your lap for a cheaper price at 3 years with some opt-outs. You know, so yeah. So we'll see. It'll be interesting. I think it's a fickle game that the front office will have to play with all these these agents, but it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
I love this rabbit hole we went down. I think it was one of the best we've had on the show.
It is. It's a good rabbit hole, especially going from the night's game and what we watched to where we ended up. But again, I think the argument, though, comes back where we can tie it kind of the bow out on today's show with the Cubs, Juice, is that if they're truly going to spend money, they're in the best position no matter where baseball goes. Because like you said, you can play hardball. It's even easier to play hardball with free agents when you are developing talent the way the Cubs are as well. I think that's the biggest key, because
absolutely
eventually you're going to get to a point where, like, again, you can become the Dodgers. Like, people are like, well, the Dodgers go out and they spend a ton of money. Yes, they do. They have the highest payroll in baseball. But if you look at a good portion of the guys they have on their roster, they're guys that they went out and traded assets for to go get or just drafted, right? Cody Bellinger, they drafted. That was a homegrown product. Gavin Lux is a homegrown product. Walker Buehler is a homegrown product. And the list goes on and on and on with a lot of these guys. Or they're guys that they pick up for nothing and they turn them into something. Yasmani Grandal is a perfect example of that. Like, they've done it, right? They've done it with these guys. But yeah, then they'll go out and fill the holes that they need to go fill, and they'll either spend in free agency or they'll go trade for somebody. They'll go get Trey Turner because they know they're not going to pay Corey Seager what Corey Seager wants. That's exactly what happened. Let's just call it what it is. They went out and said, we're going to go get Trey with Scherzer to go for a World Series. But we also know, because we're not going to pay Corey what he wants, we're going to go let him get his money. We'll just put Trey in for Corey and we'll just keep it moving. It's exactly what they did. Kind of the same thing they did with first base, right? They had Max Muncy there, and they're like, yeah, we could just stick with Max Muncy here, or we could move Max Muncy around and let him do some other shit, since we kind of know Turner's going the way because he's getting older. Maybe Muncy plays a little more second and third, and we're going to bring in Freddie Freeman, who's literally having like the best season of his career, which is hysterical. Like, you have options. Options are great as an organization. This Cubs team's going to have options because you're seeing some of the talent come to the league. We saw some of it this weekend with a guy like Wesneski. We've seen it all season with guys like Thompson and Steele and Morel and Seiya and Ian Happ, which who knows what they do with Ian Happ, but like, they have this abundance of talent. Now you can apply no matter where the market goes. You can go and get the Marcus Stroman type contracts for 3 years if you really want to, or you can go sign the big gun for 6, 7, 8 years if you're really feeling it. It all depends. And I think, to an extent, right, like there's going to be guys like Juan Soto that, a franchise is going to feel a lot easier about paying for 8 years, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But maybe to the player that's not advantageous, right? Because they know before that 8-year contract's up, they're going to outplay that deal. So I think just kind of bringing it back to the Cubs a little bit is like, they are in the perfect spot they are figuring out how to develop talent and how to develop talent just at a plethora. It's not even necessarily about you got to hit on specific guys. It's like you said, kind of just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, because even the guys that don't necessarily stick with you might still present value to someone else.
Somewhere else. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where you move them, and that's where you can fill holes via trades. And then when you are willing to spend some money, that's when you go out and do it in the free agency market. So again, every team is not built one certain way. You have to complement and make the right moves and do a plethora of things. But at the end of the day, if you're a team like the Chicago Cubs, who have a fuck ton of money to play with even going into this offseason, and they're going to lose some of that money off the books too. Now all of a sudden you're like, well, shit, maybe there's something here where, like you said, Juice, you feel a lot more confident as a Cubs fan than, a market like Baltimore, a market like, Washington, D.C., a market like even some of these other markets, right? Like, yes, Seattle just paid an arm, a leg, a foot, my left ear, and my left big toe for Julio Rodriguez.
Yeah.
But like, who's to say they're going to pay another guy like that? They're still toward the bottom third of the MLB in payroll. They're just a hair over 110 million. I think they're like 114 when I looked. So it just goes to show that, like, yeah, good teams are going to be able to compete. But when you have financial flexibility, no matter which way you go in building your team, whether it's developing organically, buying, trading, or a mix of all three, you become the Dodgers, where you can just consistently stay sustainably good. Maybe you're not winning the title every year, but you're still good and you're at least in the hunt. And then some years more than others, you're probably more favored than you would be another year. But that's where you want to be as a franchise. You don't want to go through these huge ebbs and flows like a team like the Tampa Bay Rays, who, yeah, they're always consistently good, but they always have like 1 or 2 years where they have a really good team. And like if they don't win it that year, they know they're not able to keep everybody. And then you have to get rid of guys and keep it moving, or like the Oakland Athletics did, or some of these other groups that have gone through it too. So it feels good to be a Cubs fan, Juice.
It does, because like you said, no matter where the league goes, the Cubs are in the driver's seat for both options there. They really are.
No matter how the road winds, they're going to be able to move and navigate it just fine with that 4-wheel drive that they're building in that front office.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's super simple. Juice, just looking ahead really quick, I'm not going to go through all the pleasantries. You guys know the drills. These games are both played in Florida over the next 2 days. They're both 6:40 Eastern time starts, 5:40 Pacific. I'm trying to save my voice. It's starting to go. 670 The Score, Marquee Sports Network, Fox Sports Radio down in Florida, Bally Sports Florida. It's Adrian Sampson versus Pablo Lopez on Tuesday. Drew Smiley. It says TBD right now, but I saw somewhere that it'll be Jesus Luzardo going for the fish on Wednesday. So that's when we'll be back, by the way, as well, for those that are interested. Wednesday, we will be back with a show recapping what is left of this Marlins series. So, Juice, just some quick final thoughts from you for the rest of the series, and then we'll start to wrap this thing up.
Keep finding them Easter egg moments if you're watching these games, because I think that's what we're going to have to do over the course of this last couple weeks of the season. And I've been saying it on every show. Finish it out. Let's have the capping moments of the season for guys like Morel and guys like even Yan Gomes, who are going to be a part of this team next year. Build some confidence going into next. And if you're any of those names that we mentioned for the bullpen, start carving out some roles. These are exactly the times where you learn what you can trust and what you can't trust, because you can put guys in situations to throw them in the fire because the games don't matter in the loss column. So it's absolutely, a benefit for these guys on the roster right now to just let it all hang out, man, and gain some momentum going into the offseason, stay healthy. I think that's like the main thing is what you don't want to see is somebody have just a horrible injury going in the offseason, because like the truth is that the offseason is so goddamn important. It's important for those guys to get that R&R, to work on their craft, to get stronger. We saw it with Nico Horner. He came back a totally different player and a guy who you really feel confident. Be nice to see him get healthy and have another offseason like that where he can, add another layer to his game. And I think that's, towards the end of this season, play these games out, play them hard, play for each other, and then just keep working on your craft going into the offseason, cap it, put the cherry on top, and get ready for some reinforcements coming. Because like we talked about in this long, what seemed like the preview to the end of the season here, talking about what contracts could be like and the Cubs spending some money and what deals may be out there and which ones we all think, me and you think are smart moves and, what kind of contracts they should look at. I think the smartest thing to do is to just cap this season out and make it one last thing that this front office has to worry about. Have these good seasons, the ends of this season, carve out a role and then put yourself in the forefront to say, hey, you don't have to go out and spend at this position because I'm here and I'm ready to play going into next year. I'm going to add another wrinkle in my game. And it'd be nice to see guys like Nico Horner, and that's just follow that model, the Nico Horner model of add more strength, add another layer, and keep elevating the level of talent that you have. And once you do that, you elevate the team talent that is there while doing so. So I just hope they play clean, good baseball, and we have those Easter egg moments going into the end of the year to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Find things that are still worth watching. I think in tomorrow's game, a guy like Sampson is kind of, and just to your point, Juice, right, about these guys that, you're going into the off season. Ross mentioned today when identifying, that there will be that Wesneski will start again. Was collecting my thoughts there. Sorry about that. When identifying that, they also said that they're planning out starts over the next 2.5 weeks. They're going to let all these guys start. Like you might go 7 days without a start down the stretch here. Like you might only be guaranteed 1 or 2 more starts if you're Wade Miley, Drew Smiley, Adrian Sampson, some of these other guys, because they're just trying to see what they have, because realistically, most of these guys probably aren't in the rotation next year, right? Like Stroman, you can put in with Penn because you're confident there. Steele, you can confidently put in the rotation. But outside of that, everybody's got some kind of question mark attached to them in terms of rotation arms. And, they're going to spend some money. They're probably going to bring in at least 1 legitimate arm for the rotation, maybe even 2 if they're really feeling it. Or they might re-sign a Drew Smiley. They might re-sign one of these guys that are already here. We don't know, but these next few weeks are going to help determine a lot. And so I think that's, to your point, Juice, it's this at least is going to be interesting baseball to watch down the stretch from the perspective of guys are literally auditioning for jobs. Like that's where we're getting now in the season. Unless you are a guaranteed guy, which on this roster, Ian Happ, Seiya Suzuki, Nico Horner,
Marcus Stroman,
Steele's hurt. So, Jan Gomes, because he's at least under contract going into next season. Like outside of those guys, there's question marks, even to the extent of guys like Morel and Velasquez might start the year in AAA. There's no guarantee they start up with the big league club next year, especially Nelly V. Nelly V's struggled. He's only hitting 201 now. So, who knows? Maybe he goes back to AAA to work on some stuff. We don't know. This is the audition down the stretch here, folks. So at least there's going to be guys are going to be playing hard because they're literally playing for jobs. And that's going to be something to keep an eye on. And just quickly answering Jeremiah's question, I don't know if there will be a Cubs convention this year.
I think there is.
Is there? Okay.
I think so, which is kind of funny because usually it's the weekend of my birthday. And every year I try to go and I never get around to getting a ticket. But I thought that they were going to do it.
Okay. That would be good. They need to bring it back.
I don't think they've announced it yet, but some murmurings, I heard that they were going to.
Okay. That's good enough. That's good. They need to bring it back. I think that's a sorely missed thing for the Cubs community.
Oh, I loved it.
Well, Juice, I'm going to remind people as best I can with the state of my voice right now, but Cubs on Tap is the official Cubs podcast of the On Tap Sports Network. Check out all of our great work over at ontapsportsnet.com and at ontapsportsnet on social media. Follow, subscribe, rate us, all the good stuff wherever it is that you listen to your favorite podcasts. Interact with us on YouTube and Facebook as well. We appreciate guys like Scott and Jeremiah and everybody else that from time to time pops into our comments here and gives us your thoughts. Certainly, it's always appreciated. You can follow us here at the pod specific accounts for Cubs on Tap. We're at Cubbies on Tap, CUBBIES, Twitter and Instagram. I am at Luce on Tap on Twitter. Juice is at Juice on Tap on Twitter. At Joey Knows Nothing. At Teddy Freddy 270. At Bulls Guy Robin. At Brandon M. Kane, all help here on the Cubs site. So be sure to give them a follow as well if you don't already. Bulls, Bears, Blackhawks, you know the drill. They're all back in season or going to be back in season soon. And yes, Cubs fans, you know the drill. Give your friends that are White Sox fans a hug and then send them over to our friends at Sox on Tap because they need somewhere where they can go vent their frustrations with their ball club right now. And our boys over at Sox on Tap do a good job doing that. So once again, ontapsportsnet.com, at ontapsportsnet on social media, the OnTap Sports Network. Go ahead, check out what's on tap in Chicago sports. Juice, this was a fun one tonight. We went from talking about the weekend and what was to and starting the show off with Stu, all the way down to going down some pretty deep rabbit holes. I think we started to hit like tree roots. We were getting so deep into the ground. So, Juice, any final thoughts for us before we get out of here?
I don't have any, but Stu wanted to say FTC.
FTC, and let's go Cubbies.